Hello and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. I'm Nick Sheesby. In this podcast, I speak with beautiful humans from all around the world, sharing with you their incredible stories, revealing the power in every human story, to spread love and humanity to a world that is in desperate need of it, to show that we can all connect in beautiful ways, no matter where we come from or what we look like. What you will find out is that we are all beautifully human. Let's all be beautifully human. Hello and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. Today I'm chatting with my friend Cooth, and they are so rad. We have such a cool conversation just about life and humanity and just the freedom that comes with really knowing yourself and letting yourself be really authentic and presenting yourself that way to the world. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation, and if you enjoy this podcast, follow along on Instagram at the Beautifully Human Podcast, rate, review, and subscribe on Spotify. And as always, enjoy this beautiful conversation. Okay, well, I love to start these off by asking a massively broad and open-ended question and let you take it to wherever our journey of our conversation goes today and say, tell me the story of your life.
Oh, goodness gracious. Where do I even begin? So I guess I'll start with I guess my background. I don't know. So I'm from Philadelphia originally, and I grew up with two older siblings, parents that should not be together. And um I also grew up religious. So my mom is a Christian, a very devout Christian. And my father is not. So that, had its own issues. But I grew up going to church every Sunday. I was super involved. I also used to work for this very toxic Christian organization. And that's its own beast. But I grew up with a relationship to religion that was based out of fear and control. And that also translated into my relationship with my mother because I have a lot of childhood trauma centered around addiction with my dad. And so that's where the bulk of my trauma comes from, or mm, the more obvious trauma, but with therapy and inner work, I've realized that I experienced even more trauma that was not really, I guess, as obvious as, the traumatic events that I went through. And I feel like that was intentional on my mom's part because with my two older siblings, they were seen as kind of like, quote, lost causes. They were both like, we were all just mentally ill, traumatized kids, but my mom couldn't control them as well as she could control me. So it was a weird juxtaposition because she controlled how I presented and the kind of person that I was and projected her own ideas and beliefs onto me while neglecting me at the same time, both physically and emotionally. So, weird whirlwind of emotions and thoughts associated with that I have had to really do some tough work to work through. Um, so that was my relationship with my mom and my dad. He was basically the same way of being like physically and emotionally negligent. And so I had to do a lot of things by myself. I had to raise myself. I had to learn how to take care of myself with no instruction, no guidance, no supervision. I was kind of left to fend for myself. And so as I got older, I kind of sought that out in other people. So I heavily fixated on other people's perceptions of me and whether or not they were validating me or seeing me. And all I wanted was to be seen. All I wanted was to be cared for. All I wanted was to be held and that never happened. And so while I grieve that, while I hold space for that grief, I've also learned that, I can be upset with my parents for how they treated me. I could be upset at past partners or friends or whoever for how they treated me. However, my healing is my responsibility. And so I've really taken that into my own hands in the past year. And I've been doing, according to my therapist, I've been doing like Mount Everest type work, and she's like, you can stop right now and just look at the view and look at all that you have done. So that's one part of my life story, but the other part of that is how I stepped into my queerness and gender identity, because there were so many signs as a kid that I was so gay. But of course, with my religious upbringing, my brain, the way that it was conditioned, it did not let me even begin to process, like, okay, well, why are these things happening? Why am I having these thoughts? Why am I having these experiences and feelings? So like, for example, in high school, like I had a couple of like quote boyfriends, but I didn't spend any time with them outside of school, and we weren't affectionate at all. And thinking about that was like, ew, no, like I don't want to do that. But I thought it was because like, oh, I'm saving myself for marriage and blah blah. Which there's nothing wrong with that if you uh want to do that. But it was definitely a mask that I wore for years and years and years. And it's taken years to come to a point where I am confident in my own sexuality. And the first time that I dated a person who wasn't a cis man, I was like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to feel. Because any time that I dated cis men, I was like, is this it? Like, like I'm supposed to feel like happy and fulfilled, but I just don't. Or like thinking about settling down and like marrying someone and having kids, like that was what I was taught that I was supposed to want as an AFAB person. Um, and so thinking about that, I was like, okay, I guess this is cool. Like, because I was already used to and conditioned to be content in my own misery and suffering. And so thinking about uh fulfilling those like female gender roles, I was like, okay, well, if I'm supposed to be miserable, then this is just how it's supposed to be. And so once I stepped out of that, my I feel like my whole entire world and understanding of existence and my own existence kind of exploded, and I had to start over because I was, especially when I stepped away from Christianity, and that was probably the best decision that I've ever made for myself, because that the day that I decided to walk away is the day that I felt like me. And I have never felt like that because of all of the identities that other people have put on me. So when I walked away, it opened up this whole new world of exploration into like, who is Cooth? Like, who am I? Because I had no idea who I was, and I wasn't content with being just with myself. And I don't fault myself for that, because like I said before, all I wanted was to be loved and cared for, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I deserve that. Um, and so it was like a pipeline of, I went from a straight Christian person to like agnostic and queer and non-binary person. And um, once I started to actually get to know myself, that is when I started to learn how to actually love myself. And there's so many different ways that you can love yourself, but I think that the parts that some people ignore are the things that we like to think about when we talk about self-love is like self-care and comfort and self-soothing, and those things are important, but I think it's important to supplement those things with, okay, I need to hold myself accountable. I have unhealthy patterns and behaviors that I need to unlearn in order to continue to grow into myself, to continue to heal. But I want to do those things with love and compassion, because you can't beat yourself into healing. It just doesn't work like that. And that was what I was taught growing up in religion, of like, you're a wretch, you're a terrible person without God. Which is so condemning and so terrible for your self-esteem. Um, and so being able to have all of the space to be able to actually take up space and understand, like, I'm not burdening anyone by taking up space, because that's what I was conditioned to believe as a kid. If I feel my feelings, if I take up any space, then I'm burdening others. So I have to stay quiet. I have to remain quiet. And that whole belief translated into even how I spoke out loud, because I noticed, like, looking back on just videos of me talking, I was so quiet and I wouldn't enunciate my words and I wasn't confident. And now that I am in a place where I am more confident, where I understand that I can and I do take up space, there's like a glow that I have that I never had before. And so basically, my whole life story is going from a place where everything was like stacked up against me, of like learning to love myself, learning to take up space, learning to get to know myself, to heal and grow. Doing those things was made really difficult for me, but I did it. And here I am. And I am so, so proud of myself. And I'm in a place now where I do love myself so much. And I love spending time with myself. And I love being with myself. Um, but also, it's important to do those things in a healthy way, because community is important and healing happens in community. And so, you can hold both in your hands. So even though I've experienced a lot of death and grief of the person that I used to be, or the things that I never received, or the parents that I never had, or the loved ones that I never had, there's so much beauty in that. But also, like, I don't believe that, like, you have to place a heavy, significant meaning to everything that happens to you. Like, trauma doesn't happen to, like, teach you a lesson. It doesn't happen to, make something beautiful come out of it. Like, shitty things just happen. And you can put a significant meaning to it, or you don't have to. Like, it's your trauma. And like we were talking about yesterday, like, I get to laugh at my trauma if I want. I get to, deal with it however I want to. Um, and I think I'm dealing with it in a pretty great way. So, yeah, I guess that's a snippet of my life story.
Yeah. I mean, I will first say I'm proud of you too, because I similarly grew up in a very Christian home. So when you started into that, I was kind of like feeling my own that tightness of like, oh man. And I just loved it when you said like the freedom you felt when you just like walked away from your Christianity, because then it was like, cool, I don't have this on me. It's like you took off that layer and then you were like, cool, let's figure out who I am. And like, what a beautiful journey. And I think like the thing that I had to like move past was like I just never understood like the lack of wanting to know yourself, or the lack of being able to question things. It was just one definite answer. And that was where I had trouble with it when I was a kid, as I was watching these people and I was like, I don't believe it. I don't believe what you're saying. I don't believe that you believe what you're saying, but you think it's just the only answer. But like, why can't I explore things? Why can't I think about things differently? Like, why are we not allowed to ask these questions? And how do you know? How do you know? Like, how are you so confident? Yet you're just living this life that's very safe, and you don't take risks, and you're not really like stepping out of your little comfort zone. You got your little bubble where your Christian friends and your Christian kids, and you go to a Christian school, and this is this and this. And I'm like, don't you think at some point, like if it's real, you get to those golden gates, they're gonna be like, I gave you the answer and what did you do with it? You know, it was like always for me, I was just like, why can't we question things? Like, isn't that the
Yeah.
meaning of life? Like, is to
Yeah.
learn and question to figure out if this what you're believing is real or what you stand for is real.
Right. And I think that with a lot of organized religion, especially American Christianity, it's set up that way for a reason, as a tool for control and oppression. Because if you ask questions, that means that you don't trust God, and not trusting God is a sin. Or if you are anxious, then you're not trusting God and you're only thinking about yourself. It's like, it seems like, in my experience of Christianity, anything that was an actual like emotion or valid feeling or thought was seen as rebellion and sin. And that does a number on your mental health and your emotional health and your body too. With, we talked about yesterday, body storing trauma and things like that. And it's heartbreaking, because it's like, okay, well, if I was made in God's image, then why am I thinking these things? Why am I feeling these things? And I have no desire to be religious again. I mean, like, I would consider myself to be a spiritual person because I have like crazy intuition, and I like to do tarot for myself as a tool for, guiding me to my own intuition and guiding me into introspection. Um, but it's sad, because it's like, you can be religious or you can believe in something and not suffer under so much oppression and abuse. um and so that's why I have Christian friends, but those friends are people who believe in human rights and respect me for the place that I'm at, because with with the person that I am, I know that there are people out there that would perceive me to be a person that is in rebellion, to be someone who like walked away from God, who is a prodigal daughter, a prodigal son. And it's like, one, I could not care less about someone else's perception of me. And it's like, if that's the narrative that you want to create to make you feel better, that's your prerogative, but I don't care. And it's taken years to not care about other people's perceptions, but it's so liberating and it's so freeing, and it played a huge role in my whole like deconstruction and decentering of my own faith that I had for pretty much my whole life.
Yeah, and I love that too because as soon as you can just say fuck it, I'm going to be me and I'm going to fall in love with myself. And I mean, that's such hard work, especially navigating all the things you grew up with, but then like once you moved past it and you started working towards being your whole yourself, there's just so much that goes into it. But finally, once you just get to that comfortability where you're just like, I am going to be me. And that's the only thing that I have to care about is like how I feel and how I present and just being a good person and not, being an asshole to people and just believing that I'm doing the right thing. And yeah, it's just such a cool feeling when you finally get there. And just, yeah, it's so, so nice.
It is. And I've experienced so much love. And I've also learned a lot about my interpersonal relationships, because the more that I have gotten to know myself and the more authentic that I've become to myself, the more that I've attracted people that are meant for me. And it, the more that happened, the more I kind of repelled people who weren't meant for me. And like the video that you shared on your story yesterday, I was like, oh, yes, I feel that's so hard. Cause yeah, like the people that aren't meant for you, or people that um choose not to do that work, they don't know how to approach you. And it's like, okay, good, stay away from me. Like, in the sense, I wanna give a disclaimer though. Like, I I'm not in search of people who only think the things that I think, who only believe the things that I believe. It's important to be surrounded by people who are different from you. But obviously, there's an exception. Like, if you're like racist or transphobic or homophobic, like, actually get away from me. Like, I don't need you in my space. Um, but yeah, it makes me feel powerful, but not in a inflated, fragile ego kind of way. And I really learned to sit in my own power and stand in my own power. And an important thing that I've learned too, especially in the past year, is that the right people for you will not fuck up your nervous system. And I've been learning so much about the nervous system and my own nervous system in the past year because, I've grown up with it being so dysregulated. And now I listen to my body because I was taught not to listen to it. I had to listen to God. I couldn't listen to my own intuition. I couldn't listen to my gut because it was wrong. It was sinful. It was inherently sinful. Um, but yeah, because of this work that I've been doing, because of me paying attention to my intuition, because of me being authentic, I have then attracted and I will continue to attract the right people for me. And it's such a beautiful thing to experience because it's healing. Because I have struggled with friends, especially for as long as I could remember. I've always struggled with those kinds of interpersonal relationships because I mean, I wasn't really sure why for a long time. I mean, I was just kind of a floater, and the only like solid friend group that I had were like my church friends that I grew up with. And I still talk to some of them and I love them dearly. And, um, but yeah, and it's not, I want to also say that like me struggling with friendships, I don't want to say that like, there are things that we do that might push people away. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I take responsibility for the ways in which I fail people, but I also have compassion for myself for the way that I was taught about interpersonal relationships, because I was taught that because with my family unit, like, we didn't eat dinner at the table. We didn't do things together. We didn't go out and do things together. We kind of just all fended for ourselves. And so that's what I was conditioned to believe. So I have to fend for myself. I can hold people at like a very far distance. You're over there, I'm over here. Um, but that's not how like healthy intimacy and relationships happen. So I've had to relearn that and rebuild that for sure.
Yeah, and I want to jump on that with you too, is like I'm always the person that I'm like, there's a lot of people in this world and you can find the people for you. Like, not everyone is meant for everyone. But I'm also much like you, I feel like where when someone comes by and like says something shitty about what I'm wearing, or, in the 3 to 5 seconds that we're passing each other in each other's lives, they have to say something really shitty based off of what I'm wearing that has no effect on their life whatsoever. Literally, they could just keep walking and like think their thoughts and do whatever. But like, I am very much like I don't have to have that person in my life, but I'm also the person that's like, if you want to talk about some shit and you want to learn about these things, I would love to have these conversations. Now, it doesn't
Yeah.
happen often, especially as people are yelling random shit in the streets at me. But, it's like, yeah, also going along with like unlearning to have to be like, ooh, I have to love everyone. And it's like, it's not that I don't love these people. It's just that like there's just certain people that are not going to learn. They're always going to see you as other. They're always going to make fun of you, talk shit to you. And you're not going to change that. No matter if a group of us sat down with this person, they're still going to go back to what they've learned, that they have not looked in a mirror, that they haven't challenged anything. And, like, sure, I have compassion for them, and I hope one day that they can unlearn these things and look in a mirror and at least do something different. But, especially in the day and age that we're living in, I just find it dangerous to do those kind of things too, like to react to these kind of situations, because I just don't know what, especially in this country, I just don't know what people are going to do if you say something back or combat them. So, it's one of those things where I don't wish harm on anyone, but I also don't want harm on myself. So it's kind of this weird place to be in of like not giving a fuck, but also like wanting to give a fuck because I want to be able to be part of that change. And it's these conversations, and if people hear it and they're like, oh wow, these people aren't that different, and just to prove these things that are, these people are having these ridiculous ideas about other. But yeah, it's a hard thing, and I say it a lot, and I think some people take it as harsh when I say like, well, fuck it, I don't care. But I'm like, I do care. It's just I can only put so much into something that, when people aren't trying to do better or learn things for themselves, then I'm not going to push them over that boundary. It's much the same as like when people show up at concerts that I work and they're shouting at people about Jesus and telling them that they're going to hell because, and that they're going to burn in hell and all this shit. And I'm like, I remember one time I was in Atlanta, I was working at a venue down there, and this guy, like, all the people had gone in, and it was a show that was like, I feel like they were just like, go practice, because it was like a singer-songwriter. So it wasn't like a metal show or anything. But then I was just like moving around, and the guy started yelling. He's like, and you dancing in mockery, you will go to hell, blah, blah, blah. And I just like walked over to him and I was like, I'm at work. It's cold out here. I'm just trying to keep moving. And also, like, my name's Nick, like you're just not even acknowledging the fact that I'm a receptive human, that I have thoughts as well. And I was like, I might be on the same fucking team as you. I might
Yeah.
be on the same team, but you have not a clue because all you're doing is screaming at people. And I was
Yeah.
like, I just can't imagine that that works because, like, picture it on the flip side where, like, someone comes out and just starts, like, yelling whatever they might yell at you going into church. Are you just all of a sudden going to be like, oh, you're right? Because you're screaming at me as I'm walking into something that I enjoy doing. It's not going to happen. Like, you have to meet people halfway and find some similarities and then form a relationship. And that's the only way these things are going to work. But, like, on my side of things where I'm like, I just don't think people are ever going to meet me in the middle. And if they do, awesome. Like, I love a surprise. We all love surprises. It's nice when people actually sit down and give a shit. But majority of the time, it doesn't work. So I've always been just a firm believer of like, fuck it. You believe what you want to believe. Just don't harm me. But like, I do care and I wish I could change people's opinions, but it's very difficult, especially when they're rooted in the things that we've been talking about.
Right. And I feel like people like that really only view other people as vessels for their own projection because most of the time people will talk to you and treat you the way that they talk to and treat themselves. Um, and I think that's important to understand, but it's also important to understand that like, okay, well, just because they do that, that doesn't mean that I have to put up with it, like I can love someone, I can have love for somebody, but I'm also allowed to have boundaries. I'm allowed to protect myself. I'm allowed to hold space for the hurt and pain that that person has caused. And like, there's really only so much energy that you can give to a person who is committed to misunderstanding you. And that's the type of person that random man was at that show. Um, and that I feel like saves you a lot of time and energy. Not saying that you're not allowed to like have a reaction, not that you're not allowed to be hurt by what that person is saying. Like you're totally allowed to do that. But yeah, I guess like holding both in your hands is important. And it sucks because like yeah, like I want to be able to clap back at somebody who's saying some shit to me on the street, but also like they could murder me if they wanted. They could do whatever to me if they wanted. And so sometimes I have to like, I hate saying it, but sometimes I have to like pick my battles. But for the most part, like when I can, I do speak up. Um, and it's like, okay, well, if this person reacts in whatever way, like one, I'm not responsible for their reaction. Like I'm not responsible for the way that somebody chooses to react or respond to my boundary. But again, you do have to think about your safety and well-being. And it sucks that I can't just like clap back left and right on the street, without worrying that something that my physical safety will be endangered because I set a simple boundary and I like was like, oh, I deserve to be treated like a human being and you want to like resort to physical violence or whatever. Cool. Thanks, Richard. That's great.
Yeah. No, that's exactly where I'm at, where I'm like, yes, I would like I am ready. I am like I'm not afraid to say things, but then again, it's like you're not worth the fucking violence that you're gonna bring. Like I do not, it's like I'm not gonna change your mind, and if I get harmed because I said something, then like what did I accomplish in that? I just got the shit beat
Right.
out of me. I got murdered, whatever the fuck happens, and they still think the same thing. So for me, I'm like yeah, I definitely have to pick my battles. And also, it's one thing, like, I don't know if you have this, but like when people say something to me, or I'm like walking up to a certain group of people, and I really don't like this, but it's something that I'm battling with and trying to learn and unlearn and like just work my way through is like when I'm coming up to a group of people, I'm like almost like playing in my mind, like what I could say back if they say some shit. Like it happens constantly where I'm walking up, especially like I do well of just being myself because I'm like I don't want people to look at me like I'm not confident because I am very confident in what I wear and what I'm up to. But like especially when someone says something, I'm like ready. I'm like locked and loaded. I'm just like, come on, say something, And I don't like that because I don't want to be a judgmental person, but it's just this like this like protective thing that I'm doing for myself of like, here's what I could say if someone says something. And I'm trying
Yeah,
to unlearn that too.
right. That's what your bathroom mirror is for, is practicing.
Yes, bitch.
And it's like, yeah, I could do that, but at the same time, like you said, it's like I could say whatever I want to say, act however I want to act, but at the end of the day, they're still going to believe what they believe. Um, and then, as a result, I'm harmed. And so I'd rather like assess my risk of those things happening. And if there's a low risk, then yeah, we're clapping back. Like I do that at work a lot because I serve, but I also bartend. I haven't told you that. I don't think I told you that, but I'm a sober bartender. And
Amazing.
I it's very common for men versus men to view femme presenting people as objects for their entertainment and pleasure. And I had a situation one time where because with serving versus bartending, I feel like serving you have to be a little more like you have to cater a little more into your customers' needs. Whereas when you're bartending, you're like, this is my bar, this is my territory. Like if you're being an ass, get out. Um, so anyway, I had cut my hair not to this length, but it was, above my shoulders and it was a very affirming cut. And there was this guy who was a regular and he was like, I like your hair short, but it's not long enough to pull. And I and I was like, "Ooh, you chose the wrong person to say that to." So I glared at him and I repeated that what he said to me. I was like, "Did you mean to say that?" And I was like, "Don't say things like that to me." And he was like, like he was like freezing up because he's not used to people doing that because like, femme presenting people, they're afraid to do that to no fault of theirs. to full fault of men like him. Um, and so the whole night he was just going on like, I do like your hair, blah, blah, blah. And, trying to compensate and redeem himself. And I just stopped him and I was like, hey, you don't have to keep trying to like compensate. You can just apologize. You know that, right? And he's like, well, what did I say? And I was like, you know exactly what you said. You knew what you were doing. And he apologized, but then he chose to like stop coming in because he was apparently so mortified that I had called him out on his behavior. And someone that he knew was like, well, he didn't know what he said. I said he knew exactly what he was doing. That is weaponized incompetence, and I do not put up with that. The way that he responds to my boundary is not my problem. This is my bar. This is where I work. I deserve to feel safe, and if you make me feel unsafe or uncomfortable, you're going to know. So I'm thankful that I do work in a space where I can do those things. And if someone chooses not to like spend money there because I set a simple boundary, if you want to have that ego boost, that is up that's yours to have. I don't need that. I'm just here because I need to pay my rent, you know?
Right.
So that was a situation where I assessed my risk and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do this. But there are other times where I'm like, nope, I just gotta keep my mouth shut. And it's hard, but I do it.
Yeah, and I just it, I just cringe when I hear the like, oh, what did I do? And it's like, bitch, you fucking know. Like you're a
Right,
grown fucking adult. You're a
right.
grown adult. And if you don't know, get fucking help and learn some shit about human interaction and just how to talk to people. Because if you didn't understand, then like you shouldn't be going to a bar. You shouldn't be meeting people. You should go like figure some shit out before you step out into the world and start saying offensive shit and then be like, "Bleh." And oh, it's just so cringy when it's like, well, what did I say? And you're like, bitch, come on, stop with that. Um,
Yeah, an issue because like either way it's an issue whether you knew what you were doing or you quote didn't know what you were doing, like that's an issue. Like if you cannot understand that what you were doing is blatantly wrong, then like seek help for that.
hmm.
Like I said, like don't go into those spaces if you're going to say things like that and then pretend you didn't know what you said. Like you are a grown adult, behave as such, otherwise get out of my face.
Yeah. So one thing, like I told you about the Human Library, which is just such a beautiful organization, and it like their whole motto is unjudge someone. So I like to ask people, like, not if somebody, these people that we've been talking to, if they came up to you and they were actually like trying to learn and asked you about non-binary, like what would you tell them?
I would probably start with saying that being non-binary isn't having zero relationship to gender. It is having a relationship to gender that is outside of the binary. And just because you don't understand that or understand someone, that doesn't mean that it's something to be afraid of. And again, it goes back to religion, where in my experience with Christianity, like if I didn't understand something, it was a tool of the enemy. Uh, and so, yeah, I don't know if I'd spend a lot of energy trying to like educate someone just because, like, they have resources available to them. Like, I don't want to be someone's thesaurus. Um, but yeah, I guess I'd start with that very basic like definition and just talk about my experience of like I just feel like a person. I know I've never connected with like feeling like a woman or like being a woman or being a man. Um and for me, once that kind of clicked, that was another moment where I felt like myself. Um and so it's nice to give myself that freedom because for the most part I present more like masculine and it's very empowering for me, and it even goes into like some of my mannerisms with how my energy is. Healthy masculinity, not toxic. Um, but I do have days where I'm feeling more feminine, and I should be able to, and I am able to present in whatever way I want. Because sometimes I'm like, yeah, all I want to wear are dresses right now, or all I want to wear are boiler suits. I just want to look like a gay mechanic, and I do. Um, but yeah, it helps me to get to know myself and what I feel good in, what I feel affirmed in. Um, but for a lot of people, uh, gender like presentation and things like that are so ingrained because it's like men are supposed to wear pants and women should wear dresses and they have to have long hair. Blah, blah, blah. They have to look how a man wants them to look. And it's like, no, fuck that, Richard. Like I'm gonna shave my head. And I did, you know. So it's another way of freeing myself from the perceptions of other people because, you know, someone might think I look super hot and cool. Someone might think like, oh, like they're going through a mental health crisis. And maybe I am. I'm not. But either way, I think I look cool as shit. And that's what matters, you know? Because it's like I remember, especially with compulsive heteronormativity, oh, that had me in a firm chokehold because I remember walking around like in college, for example, and like maybe like this guy will think that this shirt looks cool, or maybe that guy will think this, and that. But it's like, well, what do you think? Do you like what you're wearing? Do you like that button down shirt that you're wearing? Do you like this? Do you like that? And so I've had to unlearn a lot of that. And you know, it's a continual process because it's so ingrained into the way that we think. Um, but I've gotten to a place where I just wear whatever I want. I present however I want to. And whether or not someone likes it is not my problem because I like it. And then the confidence that happens as a result, it shows, you know, and people notice, which is like cool, I guess.
It definitely is. And I mean, I'm the same. When I started, I mean, I've worn dresses just for like parties and like Halloween and shit like that, for a very long time. And I always loved it. I just, was stuck in that like you have to be this and you can't be this. And then when Trixie and Katya came up and I started like wearing my dresses, at the show, and then I started being like, man, I really like this. So I started buying more. And then I was like, why am I only okay? Okay. I'm like, right, I'm buying all these dresses. This tour will end at some point. So I've spent all this money and I've developed this fashion for this gig, and I really feel comfortable. And the fans were amazing, like truly, truly amazing, just giving me my space to feel myself.
Yeah.
But then I had that conversation of like, okay, Nick, you enjoy this, you like this, it makes you feel good, and these people are affirming you. And I finally just got to that point where I was like, fuck it, this is how I feel good, and this is how I want to dress, and who gives a shit? And it was so freeing, just being like, this is me, and I don't have to explain it, and like you said, where you wouldn't spend a lot of time, like if somebody asked me too, that would be my simple answer is like, this is how I feel good, and this is how I think I look good, and the fact that you think I look ridiculous does not change that. So it's a really unbelievably freeing thing when I can look in the mirror and be like, yes, bitch, you look fucking great. And then I go outside and I fucking do the damn thing.
Right. And like when you really step into your own authenticity, it can be so inspiring to other people and it can be a glimmer in someone's day. Like even when I saw you last week at work, I saw you wearing your dress and I was like, "Oh my God, like this person is so cool. Like I love their dress. Like their energy is like so great. They're such a bright person, blah blah blah." Like it affects other people and it encourages people to either begin that journey or continue in that journey. And like so I have a TikTok and I like to just post like videos of the outfits that I wear because being an AFAB person and wanting to dress in a more masculine androgynous way is difficult sometimes because of the fits of different kinds of clothes, especially pants. And so I like to post those videos just to show people like, hey, this is what I like to wear. This is what makes me feel good. Maybe you have a similar body type, but also I don't really focus on like wear this if you're this body type and wear that. Like wear whatever you want, you know. I don't believe in being under the confines of like with glasses, for example, like I have to wear these glasses because I have a round face shape or an oval face shape. It's like, okay, but what glasses do you like? What shirts do you like? What pants do you like? What dresses do you like? And you feeling confident and like yourself is way more important than whether you look flattering or if whether you feel or are flattered or not. Because again, that's the perception of another person. Um, and so I've had people like reach out to me or just like comment on my videos, like, thank you so much for posting this. Like, I'm inspired. Like, where did you get this? Where did you get these pants? And it's it's so encouraging to know that by me being authentic to who I am, I get to encourage other people. And that builds community. Like I have a wonderful group of friends that I've met on TikTok that some of which I speak with on a regular basis. And those are some of like my core people. And it's so wonderful that I found a platform that has helped me like find other queer people because, you know, Lynchburg is there's very small queer community and you know even with that it's hard to feel like you can fully just be and be yourself. So it's nice to find people like all over the country who are like-minded and have you know similar struggles or similar thoughts. um so yeah, it's been really fun to use.
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on like the exact reason why I wanted to do this podcast was just like, first off, I mean, I never realized like how powerful my story was until like I went on tour 3 months sober, which was crazy, and I was working with a heavy partying metal band, and then like flash forward to when I finally posted about my sobriety, I was a year in, and a friend of mine wrote me and he was like, "Hey, I saw you on tour," and like I didn't even spend that much time with him, but he and I were like heavy partying friends previous tours that we'd worked on. And he just was like, I just have to tell you, like, because I saw you doing life sober, like I had wanted to do it, but I was like, man, if Nick can do it, then I can do it. And he's like, I just have to tell you that I'm a year sober. And so now he's like just behind me in my sobriety. Like, you know, he's just like a few months behind. And like, you know, I never fucking knew. I didn't realize. And like a lot of times when I ask people to come and just chat with me on this, they're like, why? And I'm like, because you have a story, because you've lived life. Life is complex. Like, even if you
Yeah.
think your life is mundane, people have learned things from you. They've seen, you've inspired them, or they'll hear what you've gone through and they'll be like, fuck, I've been through that too. And especially in these times where connection can happen through TikTok, and it's people that you may or may not meet in life, or just that can be your community. And traveling as much as I do, that comes into play because most of my relationships are through my phone because I'm always constantly traveling. I'm always somewhere else. So it's just one way that I like, it's the best way for me to keep connecting. And it's just so cool, like the power that we can have and just making, videos talking about your fits and like what feels good for you. And I've had people come up to me and I don't realize it because again, what we were talking about, where I'm trying to like unlearn the judging thing and like kind of like putting up this protective layer around myself as we do. I have so many people come up and just be like, I think you're so inspirational because of what you wear. And I just think it's so cool. And then, it just like balances out into this like gorgeous ripple that we all put into the world that we may or may not know what kind of ripples we're putting out there or who we're touching. And that's just such a cool thing to keep going because of that. And just be like, yes, you can do it. Like your sobriety can do that to people. Just living your life as a just a free human that just doesn't give a shit. Like those things impact people. And if that's not what life's about, then I am out of answers, you know?
That's just another example of healing happening in community with other people. And with sobriety too, like I've been vocal about it online on both platforms, and I myself am so confused. But in a good way of like, how have I been sober for this long? How did I just like raw dog sobriety out here? Because I didn't do the program either. But I have people like reaching out like, Cooth, like I am like sober curious, and they'll like ask me questions, and or they'll say like, oh, I've been sober for this amount of time, that amount of time, and it's and then I'll also receive encouragement of like, you're so inspiring, things like that. And it just makes me feel that's an example of something that makes me feel seen and loved and cared for. Um, because, I feel like, and this is my experience, when I talk about these kinds of things, um, things related to healing and growth and all that fun stuff, I speak purely for myself. I don't want to assume that that's another person's experience, because it may not be, or it might be. I don't know. But in my experience, I've noticed that like I can only heal so much by myself, you know, especially, with relationship wounds, with like familial relationship wounds, with romantic relationship wounds, with platonic relationship wounds. I can only heal so much alone, because in those kinds of relationships, like being shown something different than what you've experienced is healing. And share apart from that, like sharing your experiences with other people and connecting in a healthy way is healing, and it's so incredible, and it is one of the things that has kept me going almost 3 years now, of knowing that like people that I care about are seeing what I'm doing and they're inspired by it. um and something that I always push is like, you don't have to use absolute. I mean, some people like to use absolutes with themselves with sobriety. Um, and that's fine. Everyone's experience with it is different. Everyone's experience with substance abuse disorders are different. Um, and we all deserve love and compassion. We are all human beings. But something that I don't like to do is use absolutes with myself. Like, I will never drink again, because I have no idea. It might be in a healthy context, it might be in an unhealthy context. I hope it's healthy. My therapist thinks so. Like, she even told me, like, hey, if you chose to like start drinking again, like, I wouldn't be worried. And I'm like, huh? What? You wouldn't be saying that 2 years ago. Uh, but yeah, like I like to, whenever I have those kinds of conversations with friends who are either sober curious or newly sober, I like to approach it with compassion of like, hey, using absolutes works for you, that's great. If certain forms of like harm reduction, like smoking or like consuming caffeine, work for you, that's great. I don't have the authority to tell you what's best for you. And even if you are sober for a week and you start drinking again, you were still sober for a week. You haven't lost that progress because you started consuming whatever substance again. And I feel like that's where a lot of people get tripped up, because it's like, oh, well, I went this long without consuming whatever substance and I started doing it again. So, like, progress is out the window. No, that is not the case at all. Um, and that's something that I've kept in mind, if I ever did choose to drink again, that like that is still progress that you made. You were still sober, and that is something to be proud of, because like trying to exist in this world without substances is like, how am I doing it? I don't know. Like sometimes like I'll smoke like occasionally, but for the most part I'm like fully sober, and I'm like, how am I doing this? Especially with like my family history, like addiction is, woo, it is so heavy. And so I'm super proud of myself for that and for existing in this messed up world. Just, raw dog in life, being sober.
Well, you absolutely should be proud of yourself. And it is so true because like it also adds an extra element to what we talked about for the first majority of this time is not only are you out there, we're out here being ourselves, which is what makes people feel a certain way, but also we're feeling that as sober humans. So it's an extra step of like I am fully myself because I am talking to myself. I'm feeling these emotions. I'm going through it. It's not like I'm fucked up and I just throw this on. And yeah, I also agree with you on like I partner with a lot of people on their sobriety too. And the best example I have is my friend Brandy. She was like 7 months sober. And it's really cool, like when you start sharing, when people start coming to you on it, because I'm no better than anyone. I have the amount of time I have, and that's fucking rad. But if someone's got a day, that's rad. Like I encourage everyone wherever they're at. But she got to like 7 months, right? She had a really fucking horrible thing happen. She called me and she was really drunk and she's just like, I fucked up. I fucked up. And I was like, okay, are you safe? Like, go to bed. We'll talk tomorrow. You'll start day one tomorrow. And she hits next month, she hits 3 years. She's right there with you.
Wow.
And like when she hit her first year, I was like, I wanted to reword it and I wanted to like put power back to her because she was all bummed about fucking up the one time. And I said, look, not only are you a year sober today, but you, in the last 19 months of your life, have drank one time. And she was like, holy shit, I didn't think about it like that. And I was like, you have to reframe it. Put that on yourself where you're taking the credit and it's like this powerful thing of like, holy shit, especially as like a massive drinker, that whatever brought you to your sobriety, it was something problematic. So it's like in 19 months, if you've only drank once, I'm gonna say that's probably pretty like I don't think you would have to get sober if that was your deal. If I was like, man, in the last 19 months I drank one time, I should get sober. That's not something people are saying.
Right.
So I was like, you got to reframe that power. And it's like, when she hit a month again, I was like, you're at 1 month. And she was like, damn, it's been a month already. And I'm like, yes, it has. So I text people on their months because I have a cousin who actually lives here in Towson, has texted me 60 some months now that I've been sober. Every 23rd of every month, she has texted me to tell me she's proud of me. And
Mm.
like, can't even tell you. Like sometimes I forget. It's just like I'll get a text and I'm like, that's really amazing. So it's just like extra amazing that like with sobriety that you're showing yourself and you're being yourself and even putting yourself in a bartending situation and just showing what's possible in sobriety of like I can live a real fulfilling life. I can do these things and I can be a part of life and I can be a part of a bar system that was problematic for me. I can be a part of these things and just exist and still show people. And then like you said, people reach out and they're like curious about it or whatever, and it's like you take baby steps. You drink 7 days a week, maybe drink five, take 2 days off, like whatever it
Right.
means to you. Just walk it back and like talk to yourself, have a conversation. And if it needs to be an absolute, mine was a very big absolute. I had to stop immediately or I was going to die.
Yeah.
So there's different levels to it. And like you and I didn't do the program, but I'm always just like, whatever you need to get to your sobriety, then I am here to support it. I have tons of friends in the program. I have tons of friends, not tons. I have some friends not in it, but it's just a really beautiful way to exist because, like you said, it's a fucking wild world out there, and taking
Yeah.
all of it on without a substance is pretty impressive.
Well, and that self-compassion is so important. And another, well, first, that way of reframing, like I never thought about. So thank you for sharing that. But also it's important to understand that like in those situations where you do decide to reach for that drink, when you are in sobriety, like we've talked about, you have to learn how to walk again. You have to learn how to feel your feelings. You have to learn how to process them in a different way. So if you choose to drink again or consume whatever substance, it's like, well, how else, like, what else were you supposed to do? Not justifying or like, uh, I guess like this is the way that you were taught how to deal with your issues. So it makes sense why you're doing this. Like, this is what you used to survive. This is what you used to get through. Um, and so that's something that my therapist especially has really ingrained in me of like with all of my unhealthy behaviors in the past, my therapist tells me like, well, what else were you supposed to do? Like, how are you supposed to know how to be able to healthily regulate? Obviously, if you hurt other people in the process is important. If you're like being harmful, it's important to take responsibility for your actions. Um, but yeah, like with sobriety, it's like, well, that was your tool for survival. So it makes sense why you reached for that. And again, you still have that progress. Like you said, you drank once in 19 whole months. That's something to be proud of. So like keep going and let's like figure out like, okay, what tools will help me? What healthier tools are there to help me feel my feelings and cope with whatever is going on right now?
Yeah, and I've brought it up a lot, but I had a song that I love that just the lyrics are snails see the benefit, the beauty in every inch.
Mm,
And so that was my tool. Like that was me where I was like, okay, I am very fortunate that I get to travel a lot. I get to see a lot of the world, even when I'm in a, wherever. If I've been there a bunch of times, I've never been there. Like I get the unique ability to like relearn, but also just like taking that into context of like I literally have to learn every fucking bit of life again, and I have to appreciate it because I wasn't, if I'm being real, like, and that might not be everyone's answer to that, but like I definitely wasn't. So for me, it was like I'm learning to walk, I'm learning to crawl, I'm learning to just like snail my way through life and learn literally like every little step and have to like endure that and enjoy it and learn from it and take it all in because this is life.
yeah, yeah.
So, in that, I'll use that transition. I again have been very fortunate to travel, and I love asking this question as kind of a through one of the minor through lines in this podcast of if I came to you and I had a blank ticket to anywhere in the whole wide world and said, you can go anywhere, where would you be going?
Probably Japan. Because I I mean, we talked about this recently about Japanese horror fiction. It's reading like books of that genre have really, I mean, Japan just seems like so cool in general. But the more that I've gotten to read like Japanese literature, like both horror and just like regular fiction, um, like there's this book that I really like called Kafka on the Shore, and it's a magical realism novel, and I love magical realism because it presents the absurd as normal, and I love that. But it's interesting because I've learned a lot about not you can only learn so much through a, a fiction novel, but it gave me a little look into Japanese culture as it pertains to death. So I feel like in America, the way that we approach death is like, well, one, people are disposable, especially those of marginalized groups, and it's absolutely vile. But we have like our funerals and like things like that, but it doesn't seem as like ritualistic and ingrained into the culture as much as it is in Japan. Um, and they're so good at doing horror, both in literature and in film. But there's like a whole art form that just depicts deceased people, and I think that's so cool because it presents death in such a different light, and it's not something to be afraid of because we all have our own opinions on it, but like I feel like collectively human beings have this understanding of death to where it's like it's this huge crazy, scary thing, but it could be something that like is worlds different from what we understand it to be. And so reading that kind of fiction has really changed my relationship with death, along with all of the figurative death that I've experienced in this past year, to where like I'm not afraid of it anymore. And I'm curious, like in a healthy way, obviously. I don't want to like glamorize it or romanticize it for myself in any way. Um, but just understanding that like there are different perspectives on it and it's important to learn about those perspectives, and I think it's so cool that it's so ingrained into their history and culture. And so yeah, it's become Japanese horror fiction has become one of my favorite genres for sure. But yeah, I would just like to um explore Japan and see that in real time, and so that would be my ticket.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, Japan, I will say I've kept a little tally throughout my whole time just because I'm interested. And Japan honestly comes up the most. I think people are just super fascinated by it. But I will say, and no shade to anybody else and why they want to go to Japan, but that one was really stunningly beautiful of your reasoning. And that like I love asking the question because I just love travel and I love to think of like where people would go. And I also like if I had fuck you money, I would just call people up and be like, cool, where you want to go? Let's go. And that would be my way to see the world is through someone else's travel. And I think that'd be so rad. But I also just love why people want to go to the places they want to go. So like it makes a lot of sense and it's really beautiful. And I like it's why travel is so stunning to me is different cultures. And I love going to graveyards everywhere in the world that I go again because you know, you look around and it's like, wow, there's this graveyard. And then there's billboards. And like, this might have been something very, very beautiful 100, 200, 300 years ago. And now it's just like, bam, 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 bam. There's things everywhere. But like, also how different people bury different people. And just, it's really, really beautiful to see how they honor or don't necessarily honor because I was
Yeah.
in, it was either Latvia or no, Estonia. I think it was Estonia. And because they were like in such shambles, like they needed just like concrete and like all kinds of materials. So they would just like take headstones to like rebuild their roads when they were just under attack all the time. So it was like all this crazy things of like you go to these places where you're like, man, there's probably an old cemetery and then it's like oh wow something crazy happened so it's just a wild study on humanity and like how they honor or dishonor or care or don't care or just how life keeps moving past it which is also something that death is the only inevitability that's happening. It's coming for all of us at some point. Some people get to like tiptoe it like me and walk it back, which is awesome. But it's yeah, it's a really beautiful thing to be out in the world and see how other people honor or dishonor life and celebrate it, and there's so many different gorgeous ways. So I love that that's why you picked Japan on that one.
It's very goth of me.
It is, but it's a really beautiful thing though, and like I tell people I go to graveyards, and then they just look at me like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And then like if you go into it, there's a romantic part about it of like this was life. This is how someone is remembered. Like headstones are just wild. Sometimes I look at them and I'm like, that's what you want. Okay, all right, sure, whatever. But like then there's like some that are just like I just cry because I'm like I don't even know this person, but like this is gorgeous. Like this is such a beautiful celebration. Like this person was massively loved, and that's really gorgeous to just see.
And like mausoleums.
Oh,
Oh,
stunning,
stunning. I read a
stunning.
couple of poems about mausoleums that I'll be putting in that book that I mentioned. Um, yeah, lots of graveyard mausoleum and imagery.
Love it. All right, I have two final questions for you.
Okay.
All right, so it kind of goes along, well, it definitely goes along with what we've been talking about because it's your life and um this one is just kind of like another like deep introspective thing for you to think about. But what would you want the world to know about you?
Ugh. Um, wow, that's a heavy question. Um, I think, and this goes a little bit into what I talked about earlier. I guess I would just want the world to know that I am an example that healing is possible because like I said before, I've had so many odds stacked against me. I've come from a place where like, and I think about this a lot, where I should be, with where I grew up and how I grew up, I should be addicted to fentanyl right now and experiencing uh homelessness, and because that's where a lot of people end up in Philly and in so many other places. And oh, it just breaks my heart so much because those are people who are so deserving of love and basic necessities and help, and those things aren't being given to them, and it's really really sad to think about. But yeah, like I don't know what got me to where I am right now, but whatever it was, I am incredibly grateful because I came from a place where I was supposed to remain addicted to alcohol. I came from a place where I was supposed to continue to neglect myself and to be neglected and to be content in my own misery and stay in that dark place that I was in. But I want people to know that like it's possible to heal, it's possible to feel true peace. Um, and with the feeling and concept, I guess, of peace, I was taught that like God is peace and I feel peace from God and Jesus, whatever. I never felt that because all I knew was chaos and anxiety, and that's how I operated for so long. But in my own like healing journey that I've been on, I entered a place where I was feeling a little stagnant, and I was asking myself, well, what am I working towards? What am I doing? Because, you know, my whole life I never had any like specific direction. I didn't have any guidance or supervision in that of like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I had to learn everything myself. I've had to reparent myself, and that's a whole thing. But I was driving home from the grocery store one day, and I was listening to one of my favorite songs. Um, and I was overcome with this like feeling of peace. And I just started crying my eyes out because I was like, this is what I've been working towards. This is what I've been looking for this entire time. Because again, all I've ever known was chaos. And I never knew what it was like to just be and to be at peace. And so when I felt that, that is what kept me going of like, I want to remain peaceful. I want to remain grounded. And that is one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing.
I love that. And I will say in your response, you said, I don't know what got me here. And I want to say it was you that got you to right here today. Because you're fucking awesome. I've known you very briefly, but
For like what, like 4 days, four or
yeah,
five.
yeah, but I will push all credit to you on that because you have done incredible work and you're just a really wonderful, lovely human. And I'm so happy that we ran into each other in our cross paths, anything like that. But it's like you said, you know, when you're out there being authentic and, you know, it just like draws people into your life. And I'm very happy that that happened.
Me too. And real recognizes real.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. All right, last question. If you say there was a stage and you were up there and literally every single person in the world was there watching and you had the ear of every single person, what would you say to them?
Um, wow. That's a lot of pressure. Um, I would probably say, and this is something that I say so often, is that you are important and your feelings are important. Um, I feel like I wear that on my chest because it's so true. And I like to say that to people when they're like venting or, expressing whatever feelings or thoughts that they're having because it's much easier to invalidate yourself than to validate yourself. And I feel like that one statement can be so healing because the type of healing that it brings is so layered. Because I feel like with the way that a lot of people treat others, like I said, it's a reflection, most likely a reflection of how they talk to and treat themselves. So it's like, well, if you understand and actually believe that you are important and your feelings are important, that will bleed in so many other areas of your life. Not to say that like you aren't capable of loving if you don't like yourself. That's not what I'm saying. Um, I think that like you can really love people and be there for people, even if you struggle with, validating yourself or existing in the space that you take up. But something that I have learned is that for the most part, people can only meet you to the capacity that they meet themselves. Um, and that really messed with me, but in an important and growth provoking way. But yeah, that's probably what I'd say to everyone.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a very simple but massive, massive message because people just haven't allowed themselves to see, hear, know that. So it's massively, massively powerful. And it's simple. It's nice, nice, simple, short, to the point, but like a very unlocking part to you and learning about yourself.
Well, and that's what I like to do with my writing is to tell these little stories or to say these, I guess, like one-liners that are simple on the surface, but they make you like they're a little gut wrenching, or you're like, oh, when you read it. And I love those kinds of statements. I love them so much. I purchased with the poetry reading that I mentioned to you. I purchased this poetry book from this Vietnamese poet, and at the end of her poems, a lot of them have those one-liners where I'm like, oh, goodness gracious. It just like permeates every like fiber and neural pathway and like makes me think so much. And that's one of my favorite things about reading and about poetry and writing poetry.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it goes back into, I mean, how many times do you hear people apologize for venting to you? And it's like, no, bitch, you're important. This is
Yeah,
good. You're valid. These are things you need to do. So again, it's just like a simple, like, you're important. Your feelings are important. Full stop.
yeah, exactly. And that's it.
That's it. Well, Kuth, it has been so rad chatting with you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun. I love to talk about these things and I love sharing my experiences in hopes that like just one person will uh be seen through that.
Yeah, and it will. I mean, ripples were created. We put them out there for the
Yeah,
vibes.
definitely.
Thank you for listening to the Beautifully Human podcast. To hear more beautiful stories from beautiful humans, follow us on Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at the Beautifully Human Podcast. Peace signs up.